The first time my father tried to hand my future to my brother, the judge did not raise his voice. He only looked at an old document, then back at my father, and the room went still in a way I had waited my whole life to see. But that morning began with burnt coffee, wet courthouse steps, and my mother adjusting her dupatta like she was arriving for a celebration instead of a hearing meant to erase me. My name is Raina. I am 29, and I own a bridal alteration studio that everyone in my family now calls a blessing, even though they laughed when it was still a burden with broken mirrors and unpaid rent. In my family, praise and permission were never equal. If I worked hard, it was because I was responsible. If my younger brother failed, it was because life had been unfair. The studio had once been my aunt's fabric shop, a narrow place between a bakery and a shoe repair stall. When she got sick, everyone had reasons it could not be saved. My father said retail was humiliating. My mother said no decent family wanted daughters standing on shop floors all day. My brother said wedding girls were dramatic and cheap. Then the debts surfaced, and the keys somehow landed in my hands. I was tired of being useful only when something ugly needed fixing. So I took the lease problem, the creditor calls, the mildew on the walls, all of it. I cleaned before sunrise. I learned vendor law at my kitchen table. I altered gowns until my fingers burned. Brides came for fittings and sent cousins, sisters, friends. Within 2 years, the place no longer smelled like damp fabric and panic. It smelled like steam, lining, coffee, and money finally moving in the right direction. The car came later, when pickups and rush deliveries started swallowing my schedule. My father pushed for it, saying a real business needed proper transport. But his credit was a mess. My brother was between plans again, and I was the only person whose paperwork survived scrutiny. So the loan went through my name. The insurance went through my name. The registration went through my name. I made every payment myself. At home, though, language kept doing its old tricks. My mother called the studio family property. My father called the car a business asset. My brother called it our expansion. I let those words drift across dinner because I was tired, and because when you grow up inside small thefts, you stop reacting every time someone removes a piece of your life and calls it shared. The first public insult came wrapped in sugar. A bride named Colette had booked a private evening fitting. She was standing on the platform while I pinned the waist of her dress when my mother walked in carrying sweets and smiling too brightly. She praised the beadwork, complimented the bride, and then announced, almost casually, "My son will be helping with growth soon. Raina is gifted with details, but serious business decisions are better handled by a man." The room went polite. I kept pinning. In the mirror, Colette's mother gave me a quick look, the kind women give each other when humiliation has just entered a room in nice shoes. I said, very calmly, "No one is joining the business." My mother laughed. Not immediately. After the appointment ended, I asked her not to speak to clients about my work again. She set the sweets on my cutting table and said I was becoming sharp. She said my brother needed direction. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Names on paper are not everything." It sounded rehearsed. After that, the pressure changed shape. My brother started showing up at the studio without warning. He smiled at clients, called himself part of management, promised rush work without asking, and told a florist we were opening a second location when I had not signed anything. None of it was dramatic enough to make him look dangerous. It only made me look disorganized. In wedding work, reputation bruises fast. I told him to leave. He asked whether I was really throwing my own brother out of the family business. I changed the front lock the next morning. 3 nights later, my father called a family dinner and said it was important. The good plates were out. My mother wore lipstick she saved for guests. My brother looked almost humble, which should have warned me more than it did. Halfway through the meal, my father slid a folder across the table and said he had found a solution that would prevent future confusion. Inside were draft papers for a new company structure. My studio name was there, but now it sat above my brother's name as managing partner. The car was listed as a shared resource. There were paragraphs about continuity and family guidance. My father had highlighted the signature lines. Then I saw the notary request clipped to the back. I looked at my brother. He would not meet my eyes. My mother started explaining before I asked a single question. She said this would take pressure off me. She said daughters carried too much alone. She said if I married one day, it would be safer to know the business stayed with family. That was when I understood the fear under all their language. They were not afraid I would fail. They were afraid I might keep succeeding without them. I asked who had drafted the papers. My father said a lawyer friend had helped. Then he added, "You should be grateful we are doing this before outsiders complicate things." I closed the folder and said no. That was all. One word. My mother began crying almost instantly. Not private crying, performance crying. My father said I was humiliating him in his own house. My brother finally spoke, softly, and said he had done nothing to deserve my suspicion. For one dangerous second, I almost felt guilty. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my seamstress, Phoebe, with a security snapshot from earlier that day. My father and brother had been at the studio door trying a key that no longer worked. My father was holding an envelope. My brother was laughing. The whole dinner table changed shape in my mind. I stood, picked up my bag, and said I had work early. My father told me to sit down. I said no again. The week after that, the war moved into public air. My mother began calling relatives before I could speak to anyone. By the time I visited an older cousin, sympathy was already waiting for me. I was told stress had made me territorial. I was told my brother only wanted to help. A bride's mother postponed a fitting after hearing that my business was under family strain. A supplier called to ask whether invoices should now be directed to my brother. Someone was building a version of me in the community, and she was selfish, unstable, and hard to work with. That was when I hired a lawyer. Her name was Holland. She wore square glasses, listened without interrupting, and had the expression of a woman who had spent years watching men confuse entitlement with tradition. I brought everything: lease papers, registration, tax filings, loan documents, insurance, payroll, bank transfers, messages, screenshots, even an old text from my father that read, "Use your name for now. We will formalize later." Holland read that message twice, then she looked at me and said, "Your family is relying on atmosphere." She told me not to sign anything and told me to request the full historical transfer file from the original fabric shop. I asked why, since my current documents were already clean. She said, "Because people lie most confidently about the years. They assume no one will check. If this is hitting somewhere deep, like, share, subscribe, and support the channel. The quiet stories always turn where no one expects." All right. Now let me take you back. The records office smelled like dust, rain. Most of the file confirmed what I already knew. My aunt had defaulted. I had assumed liability. Permits had been updated. Debt responsibility had moved. Then, buried in a transition packet, I found a declaration I had never seen. It stated that no future family claim would attach to the new operating structure because the incoming proprietor was assuming debt independently and without shared capital contribution. At the bottom was my father's signature. He had signed away the exact argument he was now using to push me out. I took copies straight to Holland. She added them to the file and said my family might still force the issue into court, not because they could win cleanly, but because public pressure was part of the strategy. She was right. The hearing notice came on a gray Thursday while I was steaming a veil in the back room. My father had filed a petition over disputed family business assets and associated operational property. My brother was listed as proposed successor beneficiary. My mother had submitted a statement about shared family understanding. I stood there with hot steam curling around my hands and realized something cold and simple. They had mistaken my silence for emptiness. By the time the hearing date arrived, the city looked washed out and temporary. I reached the courthouse early with Holland, a banker box of records, and a calm so thin it felt dangerous. My mother appeared in a cream shawl, eyes already full of offended dignity. My brother kept flexing his jaw. My father moved like a man attending an event he had arranged for himself. Inside, the courtroom felt too small for everything they had dragged into it. My father stood first. He spoke with the confidence I knew from childhood, the kind that assumed agreement before it was earned. Then he gestured toward my brother and said, almost warmly, "At last, her studio and the car can be placed where they belong. With my younger son, he will carry the family forward." My mother laughed softly and brought her hands together once. I stayed silent. Then the judge opened the file, paused at one page, and looked up. He asked my father whether he had reviewed the ownership trail before filing. The question was simple, but it hit the room like a dropped tray. My father said something about family contribution, understanding, and duty. The judge let him speak briefly before turning to Holland. She stood, handed over flagged copies, and said that sentiment was not title, expectation was not ownership, and pressure was not a substitute for legal transfer. Then she pointed the court to the operating license, lease amendments, tax returns, vehicle registration, loan payment history, and the transition declaration signed when I assumed the dyeing shop's liabilities alone. The judge read in silence. That silence was worse for my parents than shouting. My mother kept shifting in her chair. My brother stared at the table. My father began clearing his throat. He asked my father if the signature at the bottom was his. My father said yes, but immediately started explaining. He claimed he had signed a stack of papers at the time. He said the language had not been properly explained. He said families do not imagine their daughters will one day weaponize paperwork against them. I finally looked at him. I had paid interest, negotiated with vendors, mopped floors, stayed late through fittings, rebuilt trust with clients, and driven deliveries through rain with garment bags hanging behind my seat. Yet the moment documents refused to obey him, I became the problem. The judge's expression did not change. He asked one more question. Had my father contributed capital to the revived business after the transfer of liability? No. Had my brother? No. Had either of them made loan payments on the vehicle? No. Had there been any signed partnership agreement, title transfer, equity assignment, or gift instrument from me? No. Each answer felt small, but together they stripped the story down to its bones. My mother tried next. She asked if she could speak. The judge allowed it, and she launched into sacrifice, family honor, a daughter's duty, a son's future. Then she said the studio had always been built for the family and that I had known my brother would eventually step in. The judge asked whether she had proof of that. She looked at my father. He looked at Holland's folder. No one answered. Holland then submitted the client interference messages, the false management claims made by my brother to vendors, and the security stills showing both men attempting to access my premises after I had revoked permission. She only organized truth into a sequence no one could romanticize. The judge reviewed the images first. In them, my father looked irritated. My brother looked amused. The sight made something in me go very still. Not broken, not sad, just finished. My father called the images misleading. He said he had every right to inspect a family business. The judge corrected him. He said there was no evidence before the court that it was a family business in any legal sense. There was, however, evidence of repeated assumption and misrepresentation by third parties without ownership authority. My brother's head snapped up at that. For the first time all morning, he looked frightened. The judge asked him directly whether he had represented himself to suppliers and clients as part of management. My brother tried to soften it by calling it informal help. Then the judge read one printed message aloud, where my brother promised a florist that he would approve revised billing after internal review. There was no internal review. There was only him trying on my life to see if it fit. My mother started crying then, real tears this time, because the performance had stopped working. She whispered that this was becoming ugly. Ugly had begun long before court. Court had simply switched on the lights. When the ruling came, it came quietly. The petition was denied in full. The judge stated that ownership of the studio, all associated business goodwill, and the vehicle remained exclusively mine. He noted that unsupported family expectation did not create a legal interest. He further warned that any continued interference with operations, vendor relationships, client representations, or access could expose the interfering parties to civil consequences. Then he looked directly at my father and brother and advised them, in a tone flatter than anger, to stop touching what did not belong to them. Still, my mother made a sound like the floor had betrayed her. My father stared straight ahead, face gone blank. My brother stood too quickly and knocked his chair. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt too bright. My father stopped near the window and turned toward me with the expression he used when I was a child and wanted obedience without witnesses. "You could have handled this at home," he said. I answered before fear could find me. "You tried to handle it at home." His mouth tightened. My mother came over next, still trembling, asking whether I understood what people would say now. I said yes, and that was exactly why I had brought records instead of relatives. She flinched. My brother stayed a few steps back. Then he asked whether I was really going to destroy the family over a shop. I looked at him and understood something I should have understood years earlier. He truly believed the center of the story was the property, not the taking. He thought the wound was possession. He still did not grasp that the wound had always been permission, the expectation that I would earn and he would inherit. So I told him, "It was never about a shop. It was about all of you deciding I was temporary." No one replied. They left together in a tight, silent cluster. I remained in the corridor with Holland. She asked whether I was all right. I said I didn't know yet. Phoebe was pressing a hem in the back. When I got to the studio, Colette's final fitting gown hung near the mirror. The front window caught late sun across the floor. I had scrubbed myself 100 times. Nothing had changed, and yet every object looked more solid, as if the room had finally stopped waiting for someone else to claim it. Called the locksmith and upgraded the rear entry system that same week. I moved all vendor communication to a new business, email with verified authorization lines. I notified clients that no family member spoke for management under any circumstance. Then I sent cease and desist letters to 2 relatives who had repeated false claims about ownership to community contacts. Quiet revenge is often just administration with a steady pulse. The social shift came faster than I expected. Once relatives realized there would be no transfer, sympathy changed direction. The same people who had called me difficult began calling me impressive. I took their money when it made business sense and gave them nothing else. The practical changes mattered more. I found a brighter storefront closer to the wedding district. I signed the new lease through the company. I hired a second fitter, promoted Phoebe, and stopped parking the car anywhere near my parents' neighborhood. I also changed the emergency contact on every file. That small act hurt more than the hearing, because it admitted a truth I had avoided for years. Blood was not the same thing as safety. My brother called once about a month later. He did not apologize. He asked whether we could meet and talk like adults. I told him adults usually start with the truth. Then he said our mother was not taking things well. I believed him. I just no longer thought her feelings were an invoice addressed to me. We met for tea 2 weeks after that in a crowded place with terrible music and sticky tables. He looked older. For the first time in our lives, he did not speak to me like someone waiting to be excused. He admitted our father had promised him the studio for months. He admitted he knew the car was in my name but assumed I would eventually bend. He admitted he had liked how important he felt when vendors responded to him. That confession should have enraged me. Instead, it clarified everything. Theft had not started in court. It had started in the stories he was fed about what he deserved. I told him I did not hate him. Then I told him he would never again be allowed near my accounts, my premises, my clients, or my keys. He nodded. The final twist arrived by mail at the start of spring. It was a small envelope from my aunt's old attorney. Inside was a copy of a letter he had sent years earlier when I first assumed the shop's liabilities. In it, he had urged my father to support me because I was the only one in the family with the discipline to save the business. My father had received that letter before he ever told anyone the studio should one day go to my brother. I sat at my cutting table and read it twice. Then I folded it, placed it in the fireproof file with the court order, and went back to work. I did not need to confront him with it. That was the strange mercy of finally being free. Proof no longer had to become a performance. By summer, the new studio opened under fresh signage with my name in clean gold lettering on the glass. On opening day, brides drifted in with iced coffees and fabric questions, and the bell above the door kept singing. Phoebe brought flowers. Holland sent champagne I could not open until closing. I stood in the center of the room after everyone left, listening to the traffic outside and my own breathing. Years ago, I would have called my parents first. That evening, my phone lit up with a family group message full of stiff congratulations. My mother had written, "We are proud that the family name continues through your hard work." I read it once, then archived the chat without answering. Because the truth was better than anything I could say back. The family name had never carried me. I carried it until I no longer had to.